So I want to welcome everybody here this evening to the Rhinebeck Historical Society monthly program. And this evening, our speaker is a professor of history at Vassar College who teaches, I wish it were local history, Patrick, but it's Irish history.
Irish language.
Irish language, Gaelic.
Yeah.
But he's here tonight on a different mission to talk about a very important part of our local history here in Rhinebeck. Something that happened in, I think it was 1999, the restoration of the
The restoration.
Of the Doughboy
Yes,
statue, and the whole story
Yeah.
of the Doughboy statue is
Memorial Day.
And Patrick's own credentials are he had been, at least locally, the Milan town historian, was president of the Egbert Benson Historical Society, also known as the Red Hook Historical Society, and has been a member of our own historical society.
I've been on the board here at one time.
Good number of years, and,
Yeah.
and once on our board. We have a vacancy, Patrick. Maybe we'll travel up from Highland.
You'll have to speak to my agent.
Okay, we'll have that conversation. So Patrick Higgins.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, David, for asking me here. And I said, I just heard something that people have failed to get the priorities straight, that a choice of watching Game 7 of the World Series or being and they choose the World Series apparently. So I don't know what the World Series has that I haven't got. Yeah. You know, I said, I'd like to ask a question. The question I'd like to have, we're going to talk about this statue, the Doughboy. How many people have seen the statue? Excellent. Joy hasn't, okay. How many people have looked at the statue? When I say look, I mean to stop and spend 5 minutes with that statue and look at it and watch the count. Just really look at the statue. And if you have, tell me what rank did that soldier have in the army?
I'm only guessing.
You don't know.
No.
We don't know.
He's a private.
Which we're going to get to. I said. Anyway, this is that's the statue. It was 25 years before we moved it. It was DeWitt Gurnell bought it, and it sat for 25 years in front of the firehouse, which is the village hall. And it was there on ground level. Thousands and thousands of people passed it. And I don't think anybody ever saw it. Nobody ever looked at it. Nobody was really aware of it. It just got there. And I was one of these that passed it many, many times and never even looked at it. And one day, at that time I was doing some stuff with Panda. Charlie, remember Charlie Boyle? Charlie Boyle, and we were running on a shoestring. And we didn't have any money, but we were always looking for something for next week's program. We did a program every week. And one day Charlie said, could we do a program on the statue out there? And I said, okay, let's go out and take a look and we'll see. So I went out and I took a look at the statue, and Charlie came out and I looked at the statue and we did a bit of talking. While I was there talking, Alan Kuhn came along. And I didn't know who the heck Alan was. And Alan said, what are you doing? I said, we're doing a video on the statue. He gave me a grunt and walked away. But the point about it, Alan at the time when I didn't know, was very much involved in the restoration of the statue. So he had an extra concern of what these two characters were doing with the statue. Then I got really interested in the statue and I saw what it was. And a little while later I wrote an article in the paper on the statue, which I have with me here and I read tonight. And it says quite a bit about the statue, how I felt about the statue. And that's how I first, and after doing the video of the statue, then we were aware of the restoration, and each move of the restoration, we went out with our cameras and we watched them take it away from there. We watched them put in the flatbed truck. We watched it going. We went to the foundry, and and then we're there when they came back. So we recorded the whole history of the restoration of that, which I think was really a wonderful thing. And any time when I would see that statue, even on the video going up the street, all I could think is Gulliver when he was a Lilliput, that giant this giant statue, 20 foot high, on a flatbed truck, just going up the road. Well, when I used to talk about the statue, I'd mention it as the Doughboy, and nobody knew exactly what I was talking about, and they thought I was talking about Pillsbury. Remember the Pillsbury Doughboy where they were and just for the heck of it, the Pillsbury Doughboy, you don't see him anymore. He died. And he died in 2006. As a matter of fact, I have his obituary. Please join me in remembering a great icon, veteran Pillsbury spokesperson. The Pillsbury Doughboy died yesterday of a severe yeast infection. And complications were from repeated pokes in the belly. He was 71. Doughboy was buried in a slightly greased coffin. Dozens of celebrities turned out, including Mrs. Butterworth, the California Raisins, Hungry Jack, Betty Crocker, Hostess Twinkie, Captain Crunch, and many others. The graveside, the graveside was piled high with flowers, F-L-O-U-R-S, as longtime friend Aunt Jemima delivered the eulogy, describing the Doughboy as a man who never knew how much he was needed, came in the lead. The Doughboy rose quickly in show business, but his later life was filled with many turnovers. He was not considered a very smart cookie, wasting much of his dough on half-baked schemes. Despite being a little flaky at times, even as a crusty old man, he was still considered a role model for millions. Toward the end, it was thought that he'd raised once again, but he was no tart. Doughboy is survived by his second wife, Play-Doh. He has 2 children and 1 in the oven. The funeral was held at 3:50 for about 20 minutes. That was so we got rid of the Doughboy, and we would come. The statue we talked was made by Alan George Newman. And Alan George Newman actually lived in Lake George, New York. He was a New York artist. And he was a student of the National Academy of Design. And his statues are just all over. And a few of them are, his works chief memorial. He's got the Triumph of Peace in Atlanta, the Hikers of the Spanish-American War. That's as a monument to Henry Hudson in New York. The one to General Sheridan of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Joel Chandler in Atlanta. Monuments to women of the South in Jacksonville, Florida. And figures of the day and night in the National Bank of New York. So he's a very well-known sculptor, George Newman. Now the thing is about the Doughboy is, where is the name? We call him the Doughboy, when it's always synonymous with World War, with our soldiers in World War I, but it goes back quite a ways before that, and we don't know exactly where, and we don't know exactly where the name ever came from. But there's a lot of speculation, but there's nothing really documented on why he's called the Doughboy. It's an informal term, and it's been used for as I said, the American soldiers in World War I. And it predates World War I by about 80 years. And we can trace it back to the Mexican-American War, which is 1846 to 1848. And it was used for a while during World War II. But it kind of faded away in after a very short period of time. And the troops in World War II became known as GIs, or the troops, or Dogface, or other things they began to be called. But the word Doughboy faded out. But in 1942, remember Dennis Day, who used to be with, I think it's Jack Benny? Yeah. But Dennis Day recorded a song called Johnny Doughboy found a rose in Ireland. And this was the word. Johnny Doughboy found a rose in Ireland. Sure, the fairest flower that ever did grow. Or the blarney of her talk took him back to old New York, where his mother spoke the sweetest blarney too. Johnny Doughboy found a rose in Ireland. She stole his heart with smiling eyes of blue. He said, darling, 'tis my duty to make American beauty of a sweet Irish rose like you. Well, that was Dennis Day's song about the Doughboy, and but it's sort of he sort of faded away after that. As I said, we have nothing in writing to say where it came from. Now, but in the American-Mexican War, it is believed when the troops went into Mexico, the soil, it had that white, chalky soil. And as they marched over the soil, the dust was constantly rising, and they were covered with this white dust. And so they began to look like dough, and they were assumed that they were called the doughboys from that. Now the cavalry always did look down on the infantry, and the cavalry looked down on them, but the cavalry was not covered with dough because these guys were in horses. The guys with the caissons weren't covered with dough either, because they rode on the caissons. And the quartermasters weren't covered with dough because they rode on the wagons. So the only ones that was really referred to as doughboy was the infantry. And that's the way it was. During the war between the states, the term doughboy was still around, and it was still referred to a certain extent to the northern infantry. And it was very much responsible for that was General George Custer and his wife, which considered to be two very conceited people. In the course of their letters to one another and to others, they constantly referred to the American troops as doughboys. And they actually, when they published their letters, the doughboy stayed with them, and the doughboy is on record with Custer's letters and Mrs. Custer's letters as referring to the troops as doughboys. Now, there's been many attempts trying to, but as I said, there's no evidence where the name actually came from. Now, H.L. Mencken did a lot of work trying to discover, and he wasn't too successful. And also the Oxford English Dictionary, the editors of the Oxford English Dictionary, did research on trying to find out where the name came from, and why the American troops were labeled. As I said, there are many theories going on, and one of the theories, of course, again, is, I said, they talk about is that the American troops, this is the food they ate. It was a rice mixture and flour, and sometimes they'd put it into a dough and they'd cook it over their fire in the ashes, and sometimes they'd put it on their bayonets and cook it over that, and it became this doughy substance. And so that was one theory, it was that might be where the doughboy came, but there's nothing to substantiate it. And then there was another one, they had a white garrison belt, and to keep it belt they put a chalky substance on it, and when it would rain, this chalky substance would run down, and they looked if they were covered with dough. And this was one of the other stories, but there's nothing we can really substantiate as to where it came from. And the most likely thing, I think, is the troops marching into Mexico, and that seems to be the accepted explanation for the term doughboy, is the one. Now, but we also have the term doughboy. It can be traced back to another time, and then a few years before the American-Mexican War, maybe about 20 years or more before that, and to another place, to Europe. The Duke of Wellington and Horatio Nelson's sailors and Wellington's soldiers, when they were at war with Spain, and when they were in Spain, their food was a sort of a cooked dough. They'd make a dough together. It was kind of sweet, and they'd cook it over their fire. And it actually became the predecessor of our present-day donuts. And these things, they would refer to them as doughboys. And so the word was used in Europe before it was used in the United States. And of course the doughboy, this doughboy, or dough, or became donuts, actually found its way into the United States, and we got Dunkin' Donuts down the street there. And so, but as I said, the English troops had some sort of a substance that and they enjoyed it. It was kind of sweet. And then I said, when we talked about the Great War, which was World War I, and it was universal, it became universally accepted for the American troops, not just the infantry. I said the word Yanks sort of disappeared, and the American troops, all American troops, regardless of what rank or what were began to be referred to as doughboys. Now there was a certain amount of thought about this also, that maybe the Red Cross had a little bit of effect in adding to it, because they were very free and generous with donuts at that time, and the American troops really liked their donuts, and they gave out a lot of donuts, but they were known as doughboys before World War I. During the time on the statue itself, I wrote an article on it which I'd like to share with you, and you'll find the reason that I asked you the question as to why, did anybody ever really look at the statue? And I will ask you when you leave here, the next time you're going down there, when the weather is fairly nice, take a few minutes and look. I mean, look at that statue and see it, and see the expression, and see the art in it, and see, do you recognize the statue? Is there anything about it you recognize? You might even recognize somebody in it. It's probably the most impressive statue I've ever seen. That's always my feeling about it. I wrote this for the Taconic Press an interview with an unknown doughboy. He has stood there for the time. He was outside the village hall at the time, and it said, this was before it was moved. He has stood there for 25 years, strong and silent. For 25 years, thousands have passed him by and seen him, but few have stopped to take time to look at him. He's a big man, 8 feet tall and 1,500 pounds. He is not the ordinary man, but an embodiment of millions of men. For 25 years he has stood outside the village hall in Rhinebeck, but he is not standing guard of the hall, but he is reminding us that the freedom and prosperity we enjoy today and take for granted were due to the sacrifices made by him. The doughboy in Rhinebeck has suddenly come into the news, not for the message he brings, but for the impact of the 25 years of pollution. The bronze statue of the World War I soldier is showing signs of fatigue due to the exposure to the elements. Corrosion has already set in, and unless immediate action is taken, many of the fine artistic quality of the statue will be lost. There is a committee formed, headed by Rhinebeck Mayor John Costa and Alan Kuhn, in the hopes to raise the necessary fund for the restoration of the doughboy. It is estimated that $6,000 will be needed for the restoration. Last week I interviewed the doughboy. He did not talk, but he said a lot. What was said was not said in words, but was said in his features, in his eyes, in the expression on his mouth, and in his dress. The doughboy is a monument to remind us of the millions of doughboys that served in World War I. We have had many wars since then, but we should not forget that those who fought on the fields of Europe, there were 110,000 that never returned. Rhinebeck supplied 179 soldiers to the war, of whom 8 died in action. Rhinebeck's World War I veterans are remembered in 2 places. As you enter the town hall, there is a plaque on the wall. It was placed there in 1939. There is a second plaque in Rhine Kiss Memorial Park. It is fastened to a boulder in the park. The doughboy is not a monument to the glories of war, the heroics of the battle, or the battlefield won, or the heroes that emerged. Spend some time with the statue, and he will tell you another story of war. There is no glory in his face, there is no victory in his eyes, there is no shouts of heroics from his mouth. He has been there, and he has felt the heat of battle. He has seen fallen comrades. He has listened to the cry of the wounded, and he is tired. He would like to go home. The doughboy is a local boy. Look at him. And some part of his expression will remind you of somebody you know. He is everyone's neighbour. He is exhausted. He is homesick. He should like to go back to the farms or back to his place of business and feel the warmth of being surrounded by his loved ones. He is part of all of us. As we examine him more closely, we notice that he has torn off the sleeve of his shirt. His arm is bare. There's no visible military insignia displayed on his uniform. We don't know what his rank is, if he had one. He represents all ranks of the service. We only know that he's a foot soldier. His battered shoes tells us that. He is the doughboy. The term doughboy was applied to American soldiers in World War I. In World War II, the American soldiers were GI or government issue. The American Red Cross is credited with the term doughboy. Red Cross volunteers went to Europe with the troops, and they were generous in their distribution of donuts. The statue is the work of New York artist Alan George Newman, who was born in New York City in August 1875 and died in February 1940. He studied school of the famous sculptor John Quincy Adams Ward, another famous sculptor who supplied Ward with was Daniel Chester French, creator of the Minuteman and Concord and the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Newman is a highly recognized artist during his very productive life. This was evidenced by the numerous statues he is credited with. His pieces are registered in the inventory of the American Sculpture at the Smithsonian Institute. He's credited with 3 doughboy statues. He has one in Lawrenceville, Pennsylvania, another in Buffalo, at the Armory in Buffalo, New York, and the 3rd, our doughboy in Rhinebeck. The Rhinebeck doughboy is a gift to the village of Rhinebeck by the then village historian DeWitt Garnett in 1973. The dedication was held at the Memorial Day that year. Mr. Garnett had purchased the piece the previous year from the artist's son, Alan Newman Jr., who lived at Red Hook. There were 2 legends as to who is the model for the statue. One is that the cast for the statue was made in a barn in Red Hook, and the artist, lacking a model, invited a local farmer to model for him. As Newman did not own the house in Red Hook, did own a house in Red Hook, there may be some credibility to the story. The other story is that while Newman was in New York City in 1920, he noticed a man slightly inebriated. The sculptor was impressed by the features of the man and his facial expression. He approached the man and asked him if he would model for the statue. The man hesitated at first, but finally agreed. The man is said to be a World War I veteran and was twice wounded. And he had received the Purple Heart for distinguished servicemen. He was unemployed, unable to find a job like thousands of other veterans. These are just stories. We don't know if there's any truth in either one. He is an unknown doughboy, and he will always remain that way. Rhinebeck is very famous, is very fortunate to have such a wonderful statue. More people should stop and admire the beauty of his work, get the feeling of history of the time the doughboy represents, and be aware that the future of the doughboy is everyone's concern. I did spend quite some time with the doughboy, and I looked at the doughboy and I said, we don't know. It's the reason I asked the question, what was his rank? No one knows his rank. He has ripped the sleeve right off his, probably through the fatigue of battle, through the heat, or through many things. But when you look at that face, there's no glory in it, there's nothing in it, there's pain. I want to go home.
being outside, the rain and the pollution and all causes the a chemical reaction on the surface of the metal, and the green that you saw in the surface was the product of those 25 years of non-treatment because of the gas, the car exhaust, and the acid rain.
The acid rain, which is supposed to be a bleach.
Exactly. Produces a chemical reaction on the metal, and actually it eats away the metal because it stays moist while after the rain because of all the dirt and depositions in the surface. And that works its way slowly into the substrate of the metal, and it causes that color.
Bronze is not a hard metal, is it?
Well, it's hard in the sense that it lasts many centuries.
Many centuries, but with but it does need a certain amount of care, and the environment we live in.
Well, the first thing to do with a piece like this is to remove as much corrosion as possible. That corrosion, that green, is a powder. It's very loose. So you have to remove that because this is what is active. That is the active part of the corrosion. So you remove it, and I used a water pressure washer with 2,500 psi, pounds per square inch of pressure to hit the surface, which lifts all the loose corrosion. So it was a little less bright green after that, but the water wasn't able to remove all of the corrosion. So what I did with the help of Nick and John, the other fellow, was to brush with a metal brush the entire surface with a brass bristle brush. Nick is applying the protective wax coating. That as after the patina, after the entire treatment is done, the wax is put as a protective coating, which this is the one that is what they call a sacrificial coat because it wears out. So that is where the maintenance comes.
Okay.
So you have to check that once a year and a half, to see that the corrosion has not started again. These areas are the ones that show more of the water course down the piece, and those are the areas that remain wet for a longer time, therefore allowing for the corrosion to keep acting. And that is, there is still a faint sign under the arm. You see those lines where the corrosion was. The coats of the BTA, which is the corrosion inhibitor. BTA is benzotriazole.
Okay.
And it was created specially to protect copper and bronze surfaces from staining and corrosion. So what it does is slows down the process of corrosion. And because outside, the piece will still be subject to the rain, the acid rain, the gas emissions of the cars, and so forth and so on. We adjusted the patina, that is, because it's still full of changes in tone because of the darker areas of corrosion or brighter areas of corrosion. So what we did was, I did the patina on the entire piece.
Which
another 3 coats of wax.
Another 3 coats of wax,
It may not be necessary to re-wax every year, but it might be every year and a half to 2 years. And to re-wax it because the wax will wear off.
We talk about the skilled hands of a brain surgeon, and I don't think a brain surgeon's hands are more skilled than the hands of that man in the crane that's moving this block. Now the icemen come and they are placing the ice underneath the block, so that it will give them the ability to slide around and position it exactly as they want. The object of this, I understand, is when they get it properly positioned, the ice will melt and the block will be automatically lowered into where it actually should be. Boy, I wouldn't like to get my fingers caught underneath that. 4.5 tons on top, 2 tons underneath. That's a lot of granite. That's right, yes. Charlie just commented to me is that this fellow should get combat duty pay for what he's doing, risking his hands underneath that thing. But then, of course, we got the crane operator, whom I said before got the skilled hands of a surgeon, so he trusts them, and no wonder he should. The way he has moved that thing around, I said few surgeons can move a stapler around with such precision. Amazing, it doesn't take a great deal of ice. Everybody probably got as much in their own ice box. You certainly need more than that for the for your backyard barbecue. But that's all that's needed. Now the support cable has been taken off it, and it's alone.
Present.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty, and justice for all. Our next speaker is the Honourable John Costa, who is the Mayor of the village of Rhinebeck. John is also a retired Brigadier General of the U.S. Armed Forces. Now I'd like to introduce Mayor Costa. Thank you, Pat. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have very few remarks to add to that good rundown on the history of this beautiful sculpture. I want to say this. It was just a year ago this month that the Coryats were invited to address the village board on the condition of, and a remedy for the condition of the doughboy. The village board unanimously adopted a measure that said we will see this project through to its successful completion. And then we did a very wise thing. We turned it over to other citizens to carry it out. Alan Kuhn and his people stepped forward and said, give us the job. We'll do it, and we'll do it on time, and we'll do it properly. And they did that. This is a good example of community action at its very best, and a generous heart on the part of the people of this community, business people as well as the citizens, to see that this monument has its rightful place in what we're going to call DeWitt Grinnell Park, because that's what it becomes. Oh God, on this beautiful day, we return our thanks to you first of all for our beloved Uncle DeWitt, in all that he did and said in his life among us, to hold up before us the importance of history and its ever-living nature among us. And then we give you thanks for everyone today who reached in a pocket or a purse and gave some money toward this monument, that it might be here in our very midst. And especially, O Lord God, on this particular weekend, we give you thanks for all of those from this community who in one war or another stepped forward and gave that last full measure of devotion. Every time we drive by on this street and glance this way and see this monument, may we be remembered of those who put it there for us, and say a little prayer of thanks in our heart. Amen.
That's about all I have to say about the doughboy, and I thank you very much for having me here.